Hi, welcome to Second Earth Alternative. This is Felipe Osorio. Wow, do we have an incredible episode today. If you have been following the channel, you know that we have been talking about the lost city of Atlantis and whether it could be in a location called the Richat structure in Mauritania, Africa. Now, this idea was originally popularized by YouTuber Bright Insight, from which he had also been inspired by a separate documentary called Visiting Atlantis. So we've been going through that area on Google Earth and finding all kinds of interesting anomalies. But I have to say, what we have discovered recently is, I don't know what other word to say other than absolutely earth-shattering. I'm not just thinking that Mauritania could be the location of Atlantis. I'm absolutely 100% convinced that it is. It's not just the fact that this area looks exactly like Atlantis, which is already a very unique description of having concentric circles and water passages in between. It's also some of the historical evidence that we have uncovered. And I don't know what else to say other than whatever I'm about to show you regarding this map of Herodotus that happened in 450 BC. I think it's gonna absolutely blow your mind. Now, what I found so fascinating is that Herodotus, when mapping the world, having one of the most complete maps of ancient times, well, he seemed to have depicted Atlantis in Africa. Now, a lot of people think that his map might have been inaccurate, that it might have been drawn from hearsay information. However, we found something regarding his map that we think absolutely closes the case on this Atlantis issue. So if you're curious to know exactly what we're talking about, stay tuned. Okay, so just to start off this episode, I wanted to quickly show you on Google Earth the Richat structure. If you have not seen it yet, it's basically in Mauritania, Africa, which is Northwest Africa. Let me rotate the map to showcase it real quick for you. And let me just take away these places so I can kind of showcase how it looks like in its natural surrounding. So if you just go west of the Sahara Desert and you start zooming in, you see this very anomalous circular structure that basically not only matches Atlantis in its length in description as provided by Solon, one of the relatives of Plato, but it also lies quite close to the coast. I mean, at least around 320 miles. And if you look at the geological evidence, you will see that there may have been water runaway effects that happened from this area. And not just that, but they've actually found whale fossils in the area. So if you have not caught the Atlantis episode and all the corresponding evidence that we talked about, I definitely recommend it. So we're gonna skip over all the stuff mentioned in that episode and go basically to the heart of why we are almost certain that this is the location of Atlantis. Now, one interesting evidence regarding Atlantis that might indicate that Atlantis was not really in the Atlantic Ocean near the Americas, rather it was closer to Africa, is basically the ancient descriptions of the Atlanteans having fought and waged war with not just the Athenians, but even perhaps Asia. Okay, so you have to really think about that, because geographically speaking, why would an island all the way in the Americas be waging war with Asia? It just doesn't really make a lot of logical sense. You would have to think that whoever was trying to conquer Asia would have had to come from some kind of Mediterranean culture that was a lot closer, as opposed to somewhere far in the Bahamas or wherever you want to think Atlantis might be. It says here, writing nearly a century before Plato, Herodotus refers to Atlantis as a people occupying the interior of what was then known as Libya. And since the Atlanteans controlled the Mediterranean as far as Egypt, Herodotus may have been alluding to them. So the ancient description of Libya, as provided by Herodotus, is this right here. So if you take a look at this map, you see that Libya really is more of the Sahara Desert kind of Central Africa area. But what's interesting is Herodotus also had the Nile River, not just going partially from north to south, but then from east to west. So this is something that we're going to talk about a little bit later in the episode. But just want to point out real quick so that you guys keep that in mind. So the idea here is that according to descriptions, the Atlanteans would have been some kind of culture that was in Africa. So going further with that, it says here, according to collectiveevolution.com, a technological, sophisticated, but morally bankrupt evil empire, Atlantis, attempts world domination by force. The only thing standing in its way is a relatively small group of spiritually pure, morally principled, and incorruptible people, the ancient Athenians. So basically what I'm trying to say is all the ancient history, all the ancient literature related to the Atlanteans possibly trying to take over the world was mostly related to the Atlanteans going eastward, not westward. The Atlanteans were trying to dominate Egypt. They had there were legends of them fighting the Atlanteans and even trying to conquer Asia. So how does it make sense that some kind of culture that's standing way out in Americas, in the Atlantic Ocean, would be sailing essentially across the entire planet to wage war in Asia? So does that really make sense, you know? Something else to note here is that it says here, the central city was a plain, okay, sheltered by mountains renowned for their size, numbers, and beauty. And it is very interesting that when you go to the Richat structure, it doesn't just have mountains, but what I can say is that the entire area is basically surrounded by mountains. All these ridges over here, I know you can't see the terrain that well in this Google Earth, those are mountain ranges. Those are legitimate plateau type mountains that have springs and waters and waterfalls that are basically dripping all over them. And you can see the evidence of these streams right over here. See, look at this. And look how many mountains there are surrounding this basin area. It's basically completely covered. Another thing to consider is one of the descriptions of Plato's mountains also talked about it being oblong shaped and going into the sea. And if you scan the area, it's kind of hard to see the terrain over here. It's just not showing the elevation very well. But if you do look at satellite images, it's pretty obvious that the mountains are not just oblong shaped, but they lead straight into the sea. So the descriptions are extremely accurate. If you didn't know, the map of Herodotus points to Atlantis as being in the western side of Africa. We got Libya in the center, represented by Africa, and then we got Atlantis up here. And there's an interesting question. What is this Mare Australis? There should be landmass there, right? Why? And then it even says here, voyage of Necho in 500 BC, as if to say that somebody had actually taken a voyage from Arabia around this area to Spain and the Portugal area. So the question is, how would somebody have done that? Not to mention that the southernmost point that has water is Cape Horn, the southern tip of Africa. And the area is notorious for being very treacherous for voyagers, let alone voyagers from the 500 BCs. So I'm really questioning whether the topography of Africa is the same now as it was before, especially when you have a map of Herodotus showcasing that somebody had actually made a voyage around this area, and they even have names for these oceans, Mare Australis. I've seen names like the Southern Ocean. But of all the evidence, the one that really floored me, that really took me back, was something that we kind of discovered by accident regarding Herodotus' map. I think there's this idea that these ancient historians weren't very knowledgeable. But if you listen to researchers like Graham Hancock or Randall Carlson, they will have a different opinion that the ancient historians, the ancient people, might have actually been a lot more knowledgeable than a lot of us are giving credit to. So, going with this idea, what I found absolutely fascinating, I mean absolutely blew my mind away, is this.
You found that from her.
Clever girl.
I'm seeing those registration laws. They don't line up.
They do. If you think like a thing. An alien intelligence has got to be more advanced. That means efficiency functioning on multiple levels and in multiple dimensions.
Yes.
So just by mere accident, I started playing around with this map, and then I noticed something very, very strange. I noticed that if you think of this map not in this flat earth, or this is the first map of flat earth, so to speak, as if these guys were absolute idiots and didn't know that the earth was round. If instead you were to think about this from a three-dimensional perspective, well, let me show you what happens. Okay, so here is an actual screen capture of Google Earth, and I decided to overlay the map of Herodotus, and then I decided to start warping the map of Herodotus, and to my surprise, look what we got here. So, the lack of perfection that you're seeing with this is mostly my inability to create a perfect mesh sphere with Photoshop, because it seems like the closer I get to making this perfectly spherical, the closer the map actually lays over Earth. It seems to actually showcase the coastline rather accurately. And let me zoom out for a second. So this is like a straight warp of the map, right? As if I'm just kind of flattening it and putting it in perspective, like a straight perspective. But what happened with this one is, instead of doing a straight warp, I decided to instead warp the image. And let me show you what I mean by this. If you take a look, the mesh that I had to create to essentially get the map of Herodotus to look the closest I could to Earth was essentially creating this almost globe-like mesh, this almost globe-like warp transition. And it was really strange that the closer I got this warping to be a globe, the closer the map started wrapping around the planet, as if the map was created with the intention of overlaying it over a globe. As if whoever made this map knew that the world was not just round, that it was spherical, that it was a three-dimensional spherical world, not some flat map Earth. Now, what makes this discovery so relevant to our search for Atlantis? When we zoom in to this area, you will notice that exactly, and I'm saying exactly, where Herodotus said Atlantis would be is, of course, the Richat structure. And if you don't believe me, let me show you what I'm talking about. You can see over here it says Atlantis, and Atlantis is shown kind of in between this east to west Nile River and the west coast. If we go look over here, just between the east and west Nile River and the west coast. Here's another one also showing Atlantis at the exact same area. So to me, it's not the fact that we found a rounded geological formation that looks exactly like the description of Atlantis, but now we have an ancient map that, if you're to assume, might have been made with the intention of overlaying a 3D Earth, that this map then points exactly to that exact Richat structure that we think is indeed Atlantis. Pretty amazing, right? I mean, this absolutely blew my mind. I'm wondering how many historians, how many people are aware that this map can actually be configured around a globe. Now, another thing I want to talk about, and as I was mentioning earlier, is the fact that Herodotus has delineated the Nile River from going to east to west. So what is that all about? You know, a lot of scholars believe that this was just a mistake of ignorance, that Herodotus had visited the area, had talked to the local people, but essentially didn't know how to ask the people where the Nile River was running through. I think after showing you guys this 3D map, that's kind of ridiculous. I think what makes more sense is that the Nile River once did run from east to west, and that whatever geological forces caused it to change might also been associated with the forces that caused Atlantis to sink. It is a very geological region. It has volcanoes all over the area, and who knows what kind of earth cataclysms could have activated the volcanism, earthquakes, or whatever it was that caused the landmass to sink and then afterwards rise. you.